So I saw a video with Trent Horn on BLM. I'm not particularly confident he's going to say anything enlightened, but I figured I'd check it out, give him a shot.
Is the Black Lives Matter movement, all right? Not the words Black Lives Matter, but the Black Lives Matter movement. The second is liberation theology, and the third is critical race theory. Now, out of all those three, the one that I was least familiar with was critical race theory. So I've been doing a deep dive into it in preparation to write that section of the book. And so that's what I'm going to be addressing today.
Very good. So then let's jump into it, because I think honestly most people were not familiar with it really up until about. I mean, I had heard about critical theory for some time. Different, especially in biblical criticism and other kinds of postmodern theories, things like that. But I wasn't as familiar with critical race theory. I think a lot of people, Deacon, it's kind of taken them by surprise. Like, oh, suddenly now it's all in the news, being taught in schools, and we don't know what to make of it because we haven't heard of it much before. What's a good summary then that you could give to our viewers and our listeners? Just the elevator pitch. What is critical race theory?
Okay, great question. Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that critical race theory is just that, a theory. Okay, it's basically an intellectual hypothesis that has the premise that race is not about categorical differentiation or biological distinction within a species, but a socially constructed instrument used to exploit and oppress people of color. Okay, so that's basically what it is. Now,
Now, I'm not too up to date on critical race theory, but I think that sounds fairly accurate considering what I've heard. Yeah, it's socially constructed. Race is not that race doesn't exist. He said something about ignoring physical characteristic differences. I mean, I think we've always recognized that people look different. It's just that with the transatlantic slave trade, we placed greater emphasis on those differences than we used to. So, Arabs, for example, and Europeans too, in the Middle Ages, recognized black people exist. But they didn't create a society whereby you were inferior because you were black. They had other reasons for why people were inferior. For example, in the European system, in feudalism, peasants were inferior to kings. But with the transatlantic slave trade, the people, the slave owners up top, were afraid of rebellion, and so they made black people inferior to their white slaves. That's basically history, and I don't know if that's CRT, but that's history. I just know because I've read a lot of history.
Sort of avoid extremes. So it seems like this is going into the category of talking about race solely in this sociological oppressee, when it is more complicated than that, because the people who would say there are no biological differences, clearly we have biological differences among us, and there's a solid Catholic way of understanding the diversity of the human community. And of course, there are people who have socially applied those biological differences in very wicked ways. So it seems like maybe it's appealing, Deacon, because there are kernels of truth here, but then they're running far past it with stuff that is not true.
excellent point, Trent. And here's the interesting thing. You think about how do we approach race from a Catholic perspective, right? So here's something very interesting.
I skipped ahead a little bit, so when he says that there's some things that are untrue, I'm guessing he's regarding to Marxism, because they went into that for a little bit. Although, of course, Trent Horn knows nothing about communism. I've watched him. He has absolutely no idea what it is, but I'll let that go for now.
Race, as we understand it today, as biological differentiation within the species, is not really something that's rooted in Scripture, because Scripture doesn't worry about race as the color or of one's skin, but it's more tribal and national when they talk about race. All right?
Like whether you're a Jew or a Gentile.
Exactly. Right. And so what the Bible does, but there's some very beautiful things that says, what does Paul say? There's no longer Jew or Greek or slave or free, or you can get black or white, or we're all one under the body of Christ. Right. So that's the thing that Bible emphasizes, that in fact, there's no physical description of Jesus.
Yeah, so that's basically what I was saying, that race existed, people recognized there were differences, but it really didn't play a significant role in society.
What is most concerning about critical race theory? But it seems to me that it takes things that, you always have to be aware of and bakes it into, this is just the system you have to work through. And it's just inevitable you're going to have this oppressee system based on race or class. And it almost seems like it creates the very problems it seeks to solve.
No, you're exactly right. And, one thing, though, that you mentioned that I think is important, I'm going to talk about this in much more depth in the book, is that it sets up this natural tension, right, between races. But that comes out of the critical theory, what really comes out of what's called the Hegelian dialectic, which, again, I'm going to explain much more deeply in the book because it's philosophical. But the idea of the Hegelian dialectic, and I'll keep this very, very simple, is that there's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
And then,
so in other words,
they go together.
Exactly. So you have this idea, you have this counter idea, and the clash of those two things develop a synthesis, which is a new idea. So you have to set up these pinnacles of conflict in order to advance. That's basically the idea. So why this is problematic?
Okay, there's something really strange going on here. So he's got the Hegelian dialectic right, so far as I understand it, but he's treating it almost like a philosophy and not just an interpretation of history. Like people are trying to create oppressors and oppressees, like as if, slave owners and slaves never existed, or rich people and poor people never existed, and that there weren't tyrannical people in history. So I'm very confused. Like, are you really denying that there aren't two classes of people throughout history? Even Jesus recognized that. I mean, so, okay.
For example, it says racism in the United States is normal and not an aberration. That's one of the tenets. It's normal? No, it's not normal. we know that because we know that as believers in Jesus Christ, as Catholics, that racism is a sin. It's not normal.
And not even that, but think about what happens when a video of legitimate racism is put on TikTok or on Twitter. What happens? The community rallies around the victim. Even in cases where it's muddled and we're not sure what is going on, the community as a whole, it goes viral and people denounce the racist act, either the actual act or the perceived act. So I think on both counts, you're right, it's not true.
Oh my God, wow, that is such bad logic. Holy cow. Would you say that in the 60s, because people were getting outraged at the abuses of activists in the South, therefore racism wasn't rampant in the 1960s? Like, holy crap, that's such... Wow, I'm astounded. I'm flabbergasted that somebody could come up with such a bad argument. And also, he said that we know racism is a sin. Catholics know it's a sin. Well, then does that mean that Catholic countries never are bad or full of sin? Like, what about Nazi Germany or fascist Italy? So, like, okay. They did all sorts of things that were very sinful, I would imagine, according to the Catholic Church.
Claim to denounce racism, they peddle what I would call is a bigotry of low expectations. This idea that, well, they claim to be enlightened when it comes to race, but they treat people of color and these other groups as, oh, well, we have to give special treatment because they can't do any better on their own because of this social system working against them. And of course, what's hard, Deacon, I feel like, is, are there racist people out there? Well, sure. There's sexist people. There's anti-Catholic people. There are people who hate unborn children, but I would.
Oh my god, I have a headache already. The stupidity is killing me. Yes, it's not low expectation when you recognize that black people make up 10% of the population, and when they're that small, it's very difficult to overcome. In slavery, was it low expectation on the part of abolitionists to say black people can't free themselves, this needs to be done by the government? Abolitionism has to be accomplished through legislation? It's so stupid. Oh my goodness. I can't tell if Trent Horn is stupid or maybe he's just a bigot trying to rationalize his stupidity, but either way, really dumb. And as for, yes, there's all sorts of bigots out there, that's true, but that doesn't always manifest. So, for example, there's Catholic bigotry out there, sure, but it's only a problem insofar as it manifests legally. And, if you want to prosecute examples of anti-Catholic bigotry, which I'm sure exists, I wouldn't stand in your way. I wouldn't say Catholics were being unreasonable for getting angry at anti-Catholic bigotry. Go ahead and do it.
Our communities back. Another one of these tenets here is that members of minority groups periodically undergo what they call differential racialization, or the imposition of negative stereotypes depending on the needs or interests of white people. So I'm like, oh, wait a minute now. Think about this, Trent. How do we even come to an idea of racism? Because you're not born racist, right? I mean, think of little kids that playing together on the playground. My wife is Irish, so my kids are mixed.
Right.
But when I see my kids playing on the playground with a black kid or a Hispanic kid or an Asian kid, they're just playing. They don't look at color. They're just kids, because kids don't see that. What happens is over time they look at television, the media starts to creep in, or they hear dad telling a joke,
right,
or something like that, and they start to learn. So racism is something that's learned. It's not something that's innate or inherent within us. So for critical race theories to say that stereotypes are being used by white people to denigrate black people, no. I mean, because think about it. There's all kinds of racial things about Italians, for example, right? Or Irish, or different things like that.
Right.
And so there's positive and negative images. So what we can't allow to do is those negative images to define a particular race and say, this is characteristic because I saw it on TV. Those images aren't true. We have to look, to the...
Like I was saying, if bigotry hasn't always been equal bigotry, right? So just because two peoples might have faced discrimination doesn't mean they faced equal levels of discrimination. Now, I already said this. They're going off a wrong principle. And this is when I start to notice spirals. So as soon as bad principles start to creep into the conversation, it doesn't take me too long before I just start to turn the video off, because as soon as you have a bad principle, the conversation goes off the rails.
Of our faith, and to see that God created all of us made in his image and likeness, and we need to see people the way God sees them. That's the key.
Well, it's interesting. I would, your point about children, I would say I've never met a child under the age of 7 who is racist, and I've never met a child under the age of 7 who is pro-choice. Because like when they see people, regardless of their skin color or their development in the womb, children just see other human beings. They see that they are different, and sometimes they want to understand those differences, like someone's taller or shorter, or if a child meets someone for the first time who's missing a limb. It's like, okay, well, how do I understand this? And you tell them, well, look, God made us. We're all different in many different and blessed ways, but we're...
Okay, this is somewhere between a straw man and a non sequitur. Has any professor of CRT ever said we're inherently racist? I mean, you could make an argument that children might be averse to somebody who is different just in general. I don't think anybody's ever said that children are inherently racist. Never heard that, but okay.
Because God made all of us from conception onward. And that's what we need to talk about with children, to appreciate the diversity and beauty and the dignity of every human being. So let's talk, though, about, especially this is coming up, I think most people are getting the real pushback, Deacon Harold, that if this were just something that was in university, ivory tower, whatever, they study dumb things there all the time. But it's this idea that, like, and what I think some of these people are saying is, we're not trying to teach critical race theory to elementary school students. That's something you guys have made up. You know, we're not trying to do that. But they are trying to do that, right? Because even at the ages of like 5, 6, 7 years old, they're teaching that anti-racism. Do you think they're being disingenuous if they say we're not really teaching this to little kids?
Oh, yeah, they're simply...
Oh my God, do you guys even listen to yourselves? Within your own video, you contradict yourselves. You started off by saying that critical race theory has to do with Hegelian dialectics and Marxism, and emerged from that, and talking about oppressor and oppressive, the person who's oppressed. Yeah, I don't think kindergartners are being taught that about Hegelian dialectics. What kindergarten class is teaching about Hegelian dialectics? Please enlighten me. But I mean, they might learn. I learned in school about slavery when I was like in 5th grade, I think. I mean, I guess if you consider that critical race theory, or he mentions anti-racism. Yeah, I was taught don't judge people by your race, which don't judge other people based on race. Don't discriminate. Is that bad? Like, do you think that children should be taught the opposite, or not taught at all about, you know, things they might have questions about? Like, why does that kid not have a leg? Why does that kid look different? You think that morals are inherent and not learned? That, for example, I thought a big thing about Christianity was that a lot of evil stems from ignorance. Certainly, I believe that, anyway. And so you need to be educated, and morals, people have empathy, but people can become confused. So, and as you said, their father might teach them, like through a racist joke. So the public schools come in to educate people in case what their parents say behind closed doors.
And I'll prove it to you. One of the areas of critical race theory that I've been delving into is this thing called intersectionality.
Right.
All right. So that an individual cannot be identified solely with one particular group. So it's an intersection between race, gender, sexual identity, nationality, all that kind of stuff. So in other words, what critical race theory would say as nothing, again, this is critical race theory, but they're saying, well, wait a minute, we need to take into account intersectionality. So if you're Black, lesbian, you know, with a learning disability, then that, you know, all this intersectionality needs to play into it. We already know that the educational system is already being infiltrated by the transgender movement, by all these other elements, and critical race theory is playing right into that. So it is absolutely disingenuous for them to say that they're not trying to indoctrinate children into this way of thinking. That's exactly.
So wait, I'm confused. Do you think that the way people look, the way people orient themselves, or the way people are oriented, that doesn't play a role in their identity? I mean, how do you define identity, self-consciousness? When you reflect on yourself and who you are, you also have to take into consideration what makes you distinct from others, right? So if you were exactly like other people, if we were all homogenous, then there's really no concept of identity. Everything is just a collective. So what makes us unique plays a role in our identity. Now he says it's being infiltrated. schools are being infiltrated by transgender people. Oh my God, I think schools are just teaching people to be more accepting. Now, they're Christians, well, conservative Christians. I don't want to, some Christians are very accepting, just like Jesus was. These people are more like, what were they, the Pharisees that discriminated against others, like lepers and stuff like that. So these people are, these Catholics here, want to keep others away from themselves. They want to discriminate, and the freedom to discriminate is a freedom they feel entitled to, and feel that in our pluralistic society, as society becomes more pluralistic, their right to be bigots is being infringed upon.
Doing.
Right.
In fact, I know there's even school boards that are being, there's movements trying to convince school boards to adopt this into their programs, just like they're doing with transgenderism right now.
Right. And it's not like they're trying to teach elementary school students about diversity or kindness or not being bigoted, but trying to promote and what I don't like, Deacon, is trying to say that these particular theories about systemic racism, and of course, obviously, in the past, we had laws that the very laws themselves were used to oppress people of color. And some of them hang over even to today. I know in Louisiana, I think a person of color could.
Who's teaching kindergartners about systemic racism? Again, you keep flip-flopping back and forth. You keep saying that, okay, so are kindergartners being taught Hegelian dialectics? I'm so confused. Are they being taught about systemic racism? How? Are you saying, like, that teaching about slavery is teaching critical race theory? My mind hurts from the stupidity. Okay.
Had like some old rule in there from 1947 saying black people couldn't be buried there. But I would say that's the exception. That's not the rule. But then trying to tell little kids, oh, well, the way everything is set up, to tell like the white students, if you're succeeding, that's because of your race you didn't earn. And tell a person of color that if you are failing, that is because of something that is completely beyond your control. It seems like it creates.
Oh my God, nobody is saying that. Even during slavery, nobody says that. Now, you'd agree there was systemic racism, overt, undeniable systemic racism during slavery, right? That doesn't mean black people couldn't achieve. Even then, you had people like Frederick Douglass, who escaped slavery, became a rich man when he died. And white people, nobody's saying that all of your success, in totality, is entirely as a result of privilege. I mean, there are autodidacts like Lincoln. I think Mark Twain was an autodidact. I'm not sure. But there's many genius white people who worked hard and made something of themselves. All we're saying is that it's harder, not impossible, for black people to succeed. And to deny this is to deny racial disparities, or to think that racial disparities in our society are justified.
Instead of actually affirming a person's inner dignity so that they don't have this defeatist attitude. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I totally see that. And you're absolutely right. And the thing is, what that does, it sets up this dichotomy. For example, so white people now have to apologize for being white, and so you're throwing these labels on entire groups of people without looking at individual responsibility.
Right.
All right, it's becoming a big circle jerk. Again, I have this principle of just, if somebody keeps making mistakes, I think it's a waste of time to continue following them, because when your principles are wrong, when you set off in the wrong direction, I don't need to be a prophet to recognize you're going to wind up at the wrong place. So if you are heading in the wrong direction, I'm just gonna say sayonara. I don't have the time or energy to deal with that. So we dealt with why their principles were wrong. So I'm just gonna end it there today. Thank you, everybody, and like and subscribe if you like my content.